Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. I was 10 years old when I found Luna in the woods. Back then, I spent most of my afternoons alone. My parents worked long hours, and our house sat near the edge of a small town, where the roads slowly turned into dirt and the houses became fewer. Beyond the last row of homes was a stretch of forest that seemed endless to me. I knew those woods better than I knew most people. I had paths no one else used. I knew where the creek became shallow enough to cross, where rabbits hid under old roots, and where the trees opened into a small field filled with tall grass. I went there when I was bored, angry, or simply wanted to disappear for a while. Luna often came with me. She was a small black cat with bright yellow eyes and a white notch on the edge of her left ear. No one knew exactly where she had come from. She had appeared beneath our porch one rainy evening when I was 8, thin and shaking, and refused to leave. My mother said we could feed her, but she was not allowed inside. 2 weeks later, Luna was sleeping at the foot of my bed. She followed me everywhere after that. She waited outside my school some afternoons. She sat beside me while I did homework. At night, she curled against my legs and purred until I fell asleep. She was the closest thing I had to a real friend. Then, one day, she went missing. At first, I was not worried. Luna often disappeared for a few hours. She was still a cat, after all. She liked chasing birds through the backyards and sleeping in warm places beneath parked cars. But she did not come home that night. The next morning, her food remained untouched. By the second day, I had searched every street near our house. I checked the neighbors' garages, the empty lot behind the grocery store, and every bush where she sometimes hid. On the third day, I went into the woods. I called her name until my throat hurt. Luna. The forest answered with birdsong and the sound of leaves moving in the wind. I walked deeper than I usually did. The light became weaker beneath the trees. The ground was wet from rain, and the air smelled of mud, bark, and rotting plants. I found her near a part of the woods I had never visited before. There was a low hollow between several old trees, almost like a bowl in the earth. The ground there was covered in black sludge. At first, I thought it was mud. Then I noticed how thick it was. It did not shine like water. It moved slowly, even when there was no wind. Small bubbles rose to the surface and burst without making a sound. Luna was in the middle of it. I screamed her name and ran toward her. She was not lying on top of the sludge. She was part of it. Her black fur had blended into the surface. Thick strands stretched from her body into the earth, wrapping around her legs, stomach, and tail. It looked as though the ground had grown around her, or as though she had been poured into it while it was still soft. Only her head and part of her back were clearly visible. Her yellow eyes were open. She was alive. At least I thought she was. Luna, I whispered. She stared at me. She did not cry. She did not move. I stepped into the hollow and immediately felt the ground sink beneath my shoes. The black sludge pulled at my feet, warm and sticky. I reached down and grabbed Luna under her front legs. Her body felt too heavy. I pulled. The ground stretched with her. The black surface rose in thick ropes, clinging to her fur. It was not like mud. Mud breaks apart. Mud lets go. This did not. It stretched like melted rubber. I pulled harder. For a moment, I thought I felt Luna move. Her front paw twitched against my wrist. Then one of the black strands snapped. A warm drop landed on my hand. I remember the smell. Burnt plastic. Wet soil. Something sweet and rotten. I screamed and pulled again. The whole hollow seemed to move. The sludge around my feet tightened. Luna's body rose another inch, and I saw that the black material had gone through her fur and into her skin. I could not tell where she ended and it began. She still did not struggle. She only stared at me. There was something in her eyes I did not understand at the time. It was not fear. It was almost calm, like she had been waiting for me. A low sound came from beneath the ground. It was too deep to be an animal. I let go. The sludge pulled Luna back down. Her body sank slowly until only her face remained above the surface. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. Luna! Her eyes followed me. The black material rose around her head. Before it covered her mouth, she began to purr. The sound continued even after she disappeared. I ran home. I told my parents that Luna had fallen into a muddy hole and that I could not get her out. My father went into the woods with me the next morning, but I could not find the hollow again. We searched for hours. Every path looked different. Every tree seemed wrong. My father became angry and accused me of making up the story because I could not accept that Luna had probably been killed by a wild animal. After that, no one wanted to talk about her. My mother removed Luna's food bowl. My father threw away the small bed she used near the heater. I kept her collar hidden in my room for years. Eventually, I stopped looking for her. Life continued. We moved to another town when I was 15. My parents divorced a few years later. I went to college, dropped out, found work, lost work, and moved through several apartments. I never owned another pet. Sometimes I dreamed about Luna. In the dreams, I stood at the edge of the black hollow. She watched me from beneath the surface while the ground breathed around her. I always woke when she began to purr. 20 years passed. Then she came back. By then, my life had become something I did not like looking at too closely. I worked in a small restaurant kitchen during the evenings and spent most afternoons in bars. I told myself I only drank because my schedule was strange. Everyone in the restaurant business drank. It helped me sleep. It helped me forget. The truth was that I drank because being awake and sober made everything feel too sharp. The day I saw Luna again, I had been drinking since noon. I left the bar sometime after dark. I do not remember paying, but I must have because no one followed me outside. The alley behind the bar smelled of garbage and rain. Water dripped from a broken pipe. A single yellow light flickered above the back door. Something moved beside the dumpster. I stopped. 2 yellow eyes stared at me from the darkness. Then the cat stepped into the light. She was small. Black fur, white notch on the left ear, same size, same eyes, same face. Luna. I laughed. That was my first reaction. I leaned against the wall and laughed until my stomach hurt. "You can't be here," I said. The cat sat down. She looked exactly as she had 20 years earlier. She had not aged. Her fur was smooth and dark. There were no gray hairs, no scars except the white notch in her ear. I blamed the alcohol. I had been drinking for hours. Maybe I had seen another black cat, and my mind had filled in the details. That had to be it. I started walking home. The cat followed me. I crossed 2 streets, turned around, and found her still behind me. "Go away," I said. She stopped. I continued walking. A few seconds later, I heard her pause on the sidewalk again. When I reached my apartment building, she sat outside the entrance. I stared at her through the glass door. She stared back. I lived on the second floor. By the time I reached my apartment, I had almost convinced myself she would be gone in the morning. Then I heard scratching at the door. I opened it. Luna walked inside as though she had lived there all her life. She crossed the room, jumped onto the couch, and curled into a small black circle. Within seconds, she was purring. I stood by the door for a long time. I should have thrown her out. I should have called someone. Instead, I started crying. I had not realized how much I missed her. I sat beside her and carefully touched her back. Her fur felt warm, real. She lifted her head and pressed it against my hand. That small movement broke something inside me. I picked her up and held her against my chest. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry I left you there." She purred louder. For the next few days, I treated her return like a miracle. I bought food, bowls, a litter box, and a small bed. She ignored the bed and slept beside me instead, exactly as she had when I was a child. She followed me from room to room. When I sat on the couch, she climbed into my lap. When I went to sleep, she curled near my feet. I began drinking less because I wanted to be home with her. I thought she had saved me. The first strange thing happened in the kitchen. I was making dinner when I touched the side of a hot pan with my bare hand. The pain shot through my palm, and I dropped the pan onto the stove. I cursed and held my hand under cold water. The skin had already turned red. Luna jumped onto the counter. Before I could stop her, she leaned forward and licked the burn. The pain vanished, not slowly, not after a few seconds, instantly. One moment, my hand was burning. The next, I felt nothing. I pulled away. Luna looked at me and licked her lips. I examined the burn. The skin had changed. It had not healed. It had become dark. The patch was almost black with a smooth, glossy surface. It looked wet, but when I touched it, my finger stayed dry. I pressed it. Oh, the skin was hard, oily, almost like plastic. Fear moved through me. I pressed it again and again. I could still feel pressure. When I pushed hard enough, it hurt. That gave me a strange kind of comfort. If it hurt, it was real. If I could feel it, I was not dreaming. I had been drinking that night, but not enough to imagine something like that. I spent an hour washing the mark with soap. It did not change. The next morning, it was still there. For several days, I covered it with a bandage. I considered going to a doctor, but I could not explain what had happened. I imagined telling someone that my dead childhood cat had licked a burn and turned my skin black. They would think I was drunk. They would have been right. So I said nothing. The patch did not spread. After a week, I stopped thinking about it. Then came the accident. It happened late one night after work. I had been drinking in my apartment. A half-empty bottle stood beside the bed. Luna slept near my pillow. I reached for the bottle and knocked a glass onto the floor. It shattered. I should have turned on the light. Instead, I tried to clean it in the dark. My foot caught the edge of the blanket, and I fell. A long piece of glass drove into my thigh. The pain was so sharp that for a moment, I could not breathe. Then the blood came. It poured down my leg and soaked into the carpet. I screamed. I grabbed the glass and pulled it out. That made everything worse. Blood ran faster. I pressed both hands against the wound, but it slipped between my fingers. Luna jumped onto the bed. She watched me struggle for a few seconds. Then she climbed onto my leg. "No," I gasped. She lowered her head and began to lick the wound. Her tongue was not right. I had felt a cat's tongue before. It should have been rough and light. This was different. Too hot, too smooth, too heavy. It did not feel like something touching my skin. It felt like something spreading across it. The pain began to disappear. At first, I felt relief. The sharp burning in my thigh softened. My muscles relaxed. The panic in my chest slowed. Then the numbness spread beyond the wound. It moved into my hip, down toward my knee, across my stomach. I tried to push Luna away. My hand touched her back. Her body felt soft. Too soft. My fingers pressed into her fur farther than they should have. For one terrible second, I felt no bones beneath it. Only warmth. Thick movement. Like pressing a hand into warm tar. I pulled back. Black strands stretched between my fingers and her body. I screamed again. Luna lifted her head. Her face looked normal. Blood covered her mouth. Then she licked the wound again. The mattress darkened beneath my leg. A black stain moved through the sheets, but it did not spread like liquid. It crawled in slow lines. I tried to sit up. My back would not lift from the bed. The sheet had become attached to my skin. I pulled with both arms. The fabric stretched with me, just like the ground had stretched, with Luna in the woods. The memory returned so clearly that I stopped breathing. The black hollow, the ropey strands, the sound beneath the earth. Luna staring at me while the ground pulled her down. I fought harder. That only made it worse. The sheets tightened around my body. The black material moved over my legs and stomach. It was warm and heavy, holding me gently but firmly. Luna continued licking. Each touch removed more pain and more feeling. My fingers became numb. My arms sank into the mattress. I tried to call for help, but my mouth felt thick. The last thing I heard was purring. It came from Luna. It came from the bed. It came from inside the walls. Then everything went black. I woke in a hospital. Bright lights burned above me. A machine beeped beside the bed. My mouth was dry, and my head felt as though it had been split open. A nurse noticed I was awake and called for a doctor. They asked me what I remembered. I told them about the broken glass. I told them about Luna. I told them how the sheets had turned black and held me down. The doctor listened without changing his expression. Then he asked how much I had been drinking. I told him I did not know. They said someone in the apartment below had heard me screaming and called emergency services. When the paramedics arrived, they found me unconscious on the bed with a deep wound in my thigh. There was blood everywhere. There was broken glass on the floor. There was no cat. They searched the apartment. No cat food, no litter box, no bowls, nothing. I told them that was impossible. I had bought those things myself. The nurse asked where. I could not remember. They checked my bank account. There were no purchases from a pet store, no receipts, no deliveries. The doctor explained that blood can dry and stick fabric to skin. He said panic can make the mind fill in missing details. He said alcohol can cause hallucinations, memory loss, and confusion. I nodded. I wanted him to be right. I wanted Luna to be nothing more than a drunken image created by a damaged mind. They kept me in the hospital. At first, they said it was because of the wound and blood loss. Then they said they were concerned about my drinking. A counselor visited me. She asked how often I drank when I started, and whether I had ever seen things that were not there. I lied to her. I said no. The wound in my thigh looked strange. The doctors said it was healing, but the skin around it had become dark and smooth, the same as the burn on my hand. They took samples. The results were unclear. They called it damaged tissue. They said circulation might have been affected. They said nerves sometimes recover slowly. But the numbness did not stop. It spread. Each day I felt less. First my thigh, then my hip, then part of my lower back. Some mornings I woke and could not tell where my body ended and the hospital bed began. The nurses helped me sit up. They encouraged me to walk. My legs still worked, but movement felt wrong. It was as though I was controlling them from far away. At night, I saw black threads between my fingers. They were thin at first. When I pulled my hands apart, the strands stretched between them like melted glue. If I called a nurse, the threads were gone before anyone arrived. They told me I was sober now. The alcohol was out of my system. The medication could cause strange dreams, but the doctor reduced it. The dreams continued. I began hearing purring. Sometimes it came from beneath the bed. I would press the call button, and a nurse would check the room. Nothing was there. Other nights, the sound came from the hallway, then from the walls. Now it comes from inside me. I feel it in my chest. A low vibration beneath my ribs. It grows louder when I close my eyes. Doctors say my scans are normal. They say my heart and lungs are working. They say the wound has closed. But I can feel something moving under the dark skin. Slowly. Patiently. The patch on my hand has spread to my wrist. My thigh is almost completely black now. The skin shines beneath the hospital lights. Yesterday, a nurse changed the sheets. When she lifted the corner near my leg, the fabric stretched. She froze. I saw it. She saw it too. A thin black strand connected my skin to the bed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then it snapped. She quickly covered me with a fresh sheet and left the room. She has not returned. They say I have not touched alcohol in weeks. So why does everything still feel wrong? Why does the bed feel soft? Why is it becoming softer every day? When I press my hand against the mattress, my fingers sink into it. Not deeply. Not yet. But farther than they should. The sheets are warm even when the room is cold. Sometimes they move around my ankles. The doctors call it muscle movement. They say the mind can create sensations during recovery. I know what they think. They think I am losing my mind. Maybe I am. But I am thinking clearly now. Clearer than ever. I have not touched alcohol for weeks, or at least that is what they tell me. Sometimes I wonder whether I am still in my apartment. Maybe I never woke up. Maybe the hospital is only another thing my mind created while I lie trapped in that bed. No, that cannot be true. The nurses are real. The machines are real. The pain is real, but there is less pain every day, less feeling, less space between me and the mattress. Tonight, the purring is louder. It no longer comes and goes. It is constant. My whole body vibrates with it. I tried to pull my arm from the bed a few minutes ago. The sheet lifted with me. Black ropes stretched from my skin into the mattress. They did not break. The room is empty now. The door is closed. I can hear people speaking outside, but no one has come in for hours. Maybe they are afraid. Maybe they finally understand. I do not know if I am healing. I do not know if I am dying. Perhaps those are the same thing now. All I know is that something's still here. Whether it is my mind, Luna, or something that learned to wear her shape, I cannot tell anymore. Luna died in the woods. I know that. I watched the black ground swallow her. Whatever followed me home looked exactly like her. Same size, same eyes, same white notch on her ear. But maybe it was never Luna. Maybe the thing in the woods kept her shape for 20 years. Maybe it waited until I was alone enough, drunk enough, and desperate enough to let it inside. The sheets have begun moving again. They ripple beneath me as though something large is breathing under the bed. No, not under it. Inside it. Inside me. The purring grows deeper. It sounds pleased. I can feel something pressing against my spine from within the mattress. Warm paws. A heavy body curling around me. I want to fight. I know I should. But I am so tired. The numbness feels gentle now, almost comforting, like being held. A black shape is rising beneath the sheet near my chest. 2 yellow eyes have opened in the fabric. They are staring at me. Luna used to look at me that way when I was a child. Patient, calm, waiting for me to fall asleep. The bed is pulling me down slowly. My shoulders have already sunk beneath the surface. Black strands cover my arms and chest. They move across my face like warm fingers. The purring is inside my skull now. I understand what Luna was doing in the woods. She was not trapped. She was becoming part of it. And now it is waiting for the moment I finally stop fighting. Of all the creepypastas I read when I was a kid, the Russian sleep experiment stayed with me the longest. It was not because of the picture attached to the story, although that image frightened me more than I would ever admit at the time. I remember opening it late at night on an old family computer, sitting close to the screen while everyone else slept. The room was dark except for the weak blue light from the monitor. When the picture appeared, I immediately looked away, but I could still see it in my mind. The face was thin and pale. The eyes were too wide. The mouth looked frozen in a terrible expression somewhere between pain and joy. I closed the page that night, but I opened it again the next day. The picture was frightening, but the idea behind the story interested me much more. What would really happen if a human being was forced to stay awake for long enough? At first, the question seemed simple. People became tired. They started making mistakes. They became angry and confused. Eventually, they fell asleep. But what if they were not allowed to sleep? What if someone stopped the body from doing the one thing it needed most? Would the person lose their mind? Would they begin seeing things? Would their body start destroying itself? Would there be some hidden part of the human brain that only appeared when sleep was taken away? I searched for answers whenever I could. I read medical articles I barely understood. I watched videos about people who had stayed awake for days. Most of them described shaking hands, blurred vision, poor memory, and hallucinations. None of it felt complete. Every study seemed to stop before reaching the point I cared about. The researchers always allowed the subject to sleep. They ended the test when the person became too sick. They talked about safety, ethics, and long-term damage. I wanted to know what happened after safety no longer mattered. Thankfully, rich and evil people exist, and I happened to work for one of them. Actually, I worked for several of them. They were not Russian. They were not American either. Well, it is probably better if I leave it there. Names do not matter. Countries do not matter. The people paying for the work had enough money to make borders meaningless. They owned companies, private islands, research centers, hospitals, and more politicians than I could count. When people have that much money, the law becomes more of a suggestion than a rule. The facility where I worked did not officially exist. From the outside, it looked like an old industrial building surrounded by empty land. There were no signs, no company logos, and no windows on the lower floors. Trucks arrived at strange hours. Guards checked every vehicle before allowing it through the gate. Inside, it was cleaner than most hospitals. White walls, bright lights, steel doors, cameras in every corner. The lower levels were where the real work happened. The people in charge called it research. The workers called it testing. The guards called it business. The subjects did not call it anything for very long. They were brought to us from different places. Some were prisoners, some were homeless, some were people no one would search for. A few had been promised money for a medical study and only realized too late that they were never going home. I told myself I was not responsible for how they arrived. I told myself my job was only to watch the machines, record the results, and follow instructions. I told myself many things. The purpose of the project was simple. We wanted to keep a human subject awake for as long as possible and record every stage of physical and mental collapse. It sounded exciting when management explained it. They used words like breakthrough, discovery, and human limits. They said our work might help soldiers stay awake during long missions. They said it could improve emergency medicine. They said it could help doctors understand sleep disorders and brain damage. Perhaps some of that was true. Mostly, the people funding us wanted to watch. They paid extra for private camera access. They placed bets on how long subjects would survive. Sometimes they sent special requests. Make the room colder, increase the lights, play a child crying through the speakers. Tell the subject their family's in the next room. Rich people become creative when they are bored. The truth about sleep deprivation was less dramatic than the old creepypasta suggested. The subjects did not transform into monsters. They did not tear open their own bodies and eat themselves. They did not gain impossible strength. They simply died. First, we kept them awake with caffeine. Large amounts of caffeine? It worked for a while, though not as long as most people would expect. Their hands shook. Their hearts raced. Sweat covered their bodies. They became talkative, then angry, then confused. After that, we used stronger stimulants. Amphetamines kept them going longer. At first, the subjects seemed almost normal. Some became energetic. They talked quickly and laughed at things that were not funny. They believed they could stay awake forever. That confidence never lasted. By the second day, their thinking became slow and broken. They forgot questions before answering them. They stared at corners of the room. They heard voices that were not there. Some begged us to turn off the lights. Others begged us to make the lights brighter because they thought something was hiding in the shadows. When the drug stopped working, we moved to more extreme methods. Electric shocks were the most common. The subject would begin drifting off, their head falling forward, and the machine would send a sharp current through the body. The shock was not usually strong enough to kill them. It only needed to wake them, usually. Physical stimulation came next. Management liked that phrase. It sounded professional. It included cold water, loud noises, needles, forced movement, and pain. Sometimes a guard walked the subject around the room while two others held their arms. Sometimes the subject was strapped upright so their body could not fall into a sleeping position. None of it mattered in the end. After about 3 days, the brain simply began shutting down. The eyes might remain open. The body might still move. The mouth might still make sounds. But the person behind those eyes was no longer fully there. The brain found a way to sleep even while the body remained awake. Small sections would shut down one at a time. The subject would lose language, memory, balance, and control over basic movement. They might speak clearly one moment and forget their own name the next. After that came death. We called the stages death waves. I am not proud of the name. At the time, it made the work sound important. It helped us talk about suffering as if we were discussing weather patterns. The first wave was self-inflicted death. It usually began around the 3rd day, though some subjects reached it earlier. By then, sleep had become the only thing they wanted. Food did not matter. Water did not matter. Freedom did not matter. Some subjects promised us money, others offered information, secrets, or family property. A few tried to bargain with people who were not in the room. When begging failed, they tried to force sleep. One man slammed his head against the wall until his skull cracked. A woman tried to swallow her own tongue. Another subject held his breath every time the guards looked away. He believed that if he died for a few seconds, his brain might finally rest. That is what sleep deprivation does. It turns sleep into something more important than life. The first death wave was easy enough to survive. We strapped the subjects down. Their wrists were fixed to the bed. Their ankles were locked in place. Soft straps held the head steady so they could not bite, strike, or break their own necks. We removed anything they might use to hurt themselves. Sometimes they still found ways. Humans are clever when desperate. One subject rubbed his wrist against a restraint for hours until the skin came away. He kept rubbing until he reached something deeper. He died smiling. The second wave involved body temperature. That stage fascinated everyone. The human body depends on sleep for more than rest. Sleep helps control hormones, blood pressure, memory, healing, and temperature. Without it, those systems began to fail. Some subjects became dangerously cold. Their body temperature dropped even though the room was warm. Their lips turned blue. Their teeth shook so hard that several cracked. The muscles became stiff and the heartbeat slowed. We covered them with heated blankets. We warmed the room. We pumped warm fluids into their veins. Sometimes nothing worked. The body seemed to decide it was freezing, and no amount of heat could convince it otherwise. Other subjects went in the opposite direction. Their temperature rose. At first, it looked like a normal fever. Then it climbed higher. 39 degrees Celsius, 40, 42. The skin became red. Sweat poured from every part of the body. The heart raced so quickly that the monitors struggled to count it. The highest confirmed temperature I saw was just under 48 degrees Celsius. That person did not look human by the end. The body was cooking from within. We placed ice around the neck, chest, and legs. We used cooling machines. We lowered the room temperature until the workers needed winter jackets. It did not help. The brain had lost control. That was the part that interested the people funding us most. The body was not reacting to the room. It was reacting to instructions from a broken brain. We had many names for that stage over the years. One research director called it ebony and ivory because the body could move toward two opposite extremes. Another called it Agni and Rudra, after old gods connected to fire and destruction. A manager with a love for dramatic language called it as above, so below. No one was sure what that was supposed to mean. Eventually, management decided the name sounded unprofessional. They changed it to unstable temperature phase. Simple, cold, easy to place in a report. Then came the heart attack. Yes, I know that sounds disappointing after everything else. People expected something stranger. They expected the brain to melt. They expected complete madness or violent transformation. They wanted something worthy of the stories. Instead, the heart failed. Every time. The body had been pushed too far. The drugs, stress, heat, cold, fear, pain, and lack of sleep placed too much pressure on the heart. Sometimes it stopped suddenly. Other times the rhythm became uneven first. The monitor showed strange patterns. The subject's chest tightened. Their breathing became shallow. Then the alarm sounded. We tried to restart the heart, but usually only for appearance. By that point, the brain was badly damaged. Even if the heart started again, there was no person left to save. We almost gave that final stage a dramatic name. The final reckoning was the most popular suggestion. Someone else proposed the last bell. Management rejected both. The report simply called it heart attack. That was exactly what it was. Heart attack. Experiment over. Honestly, I would not even call what we did an experiment. An experiment is supposed to answer a question. We already knew what would happen. We repeated the same process again and again. We changed small details, recorded the results, and pretended each death taught us something new. It did not. We were not searching for truth. We were torturing people because wealthy men wanted to watch. Evil people were paying other evil people to hurt helpless strangers. I happened to be one of the people accepting the money. That was all there was to it. I preferred the word experiment because it helped me sleep at night. I was not a criminal. I was a researcher. I was not torturing innocent people. I was studying the limits of the human brain. I was not standing behind glass while a terrified man begged for his mother. I was collecting data. That was what I told myself. I repeated it every morning before work. I repeated it every night when I closed my eyes. I repeated it when I began drinking. At first, I only drank on weekends. Then I started having one glass after work. One became three. Three became five. Soon, I could not sleep without alcohol. There's something almost funny about that. I spent years keeping people awake, and in the end, I became unable to rest. That night, I sat alone at a bar several miles from my apartment. It was dark and loud. Weak yellow lights hung over the tables. Music played from old speakers near the ceiling, but no one seemed to be listening. I had been there for hours. The bartender had stopped asking whether I wanted another drink. He simply filled the glass whenever it became empty. I stared at the whiskey in front of me. 17 glasses. I had counted them carefully until the numbers stopped feeling real. Perhaps it was 16. Perhaps it was 20. It did not matter. My face felt numb. My body swayed even though I was sitting still. The room moved slowly from side to side. I thought about the subjects. I remembered their numbers better than their names. Subject 42 lasted 68 hours. Subject 59 stopped speaking after the second day. Subject 73 sang the same childhood song for 9 hours. Subject 88 had begged me to kill him. I had ignored him. I wondered how many of them would appear if I closed my eyes. That was why I kept drinking. I finished the glass and placed it upside down on the bar. That's enough, I told myself. My voice sounded far away. I stood. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the counter before I fell. Someone nearby laughed, but I did not look at them. I pulled money from my pocket and dropped it onto the bar. It was far more than I owed, but counting the notes felt impossible. The bartender looked at the cash, then at me. "You need a cab," he said. "I need sleep," I answered. He stared at me strangely. I turned toward the exit. Every step required thought. Left foot. Right foot. Do not fall. I'd almost reached the door when a hand grabbed my shoulder. The grip was firm. Too firm. "Where are you going, my friend?" The voice came from behind me. A Russian accent. Not a normal Russian accent. It was so heavy and dramatic that it sounded fake, like someone making fun of an old movie villain. I turned around slowly. The man behind me was bald. His eyes were narrow and his lips looked swollen. His face was clean-shaven, smooth, and pale beneath the bar lights. I did not recognize him. He grinned. "I'm going home," I said. The words came out badly. "Going home for what?" he asked. "To sleep." His grin widened. The people sitting near us had gone quiet. I looked around. They were all watching. "In Mother Russia," the man said, leaning closer, "you do not go to sleep." His breath smelled sweet and rotten. I tried to step back, but his hand remained on my shoulder. "Sleep comes to you." He stretched the final word until it became a low, strange sound. You. Then he laughed. At first it was a normal laugh, short and loud. Then someone else joined him. A woman near the bar began laughing. A man at a corner table laughed too. Within seconds, the whole room had joined in. The sound rose around me. Loud, sharp, endless. The bartender placed both hands on the counter and laughed until his face became red. The music stopped, but the laughter continued. I looked toward the door. It seemed much farther away than before. The room began spinning faster. I tried to pull away from the bald man, but my legs would not move. Everyone was laughing. The sounds joined together until they no longer seemed human. High voices, deep voices, broken voices. Some sounded like children. Some sounded like old men. Some sounded like people I remembered from the facility. I heard Subject 88. I was sure of it. He was laughing behind me. I turned, but every face looked unfamiliar. Then I started laughing too. I did not know why. Nothing was funny. Fear filled every part of my body, yet laughter forced its way out of my throat. I tried to stop. I could not. My mouth opened wider. My stomach tightened. Tears ran from my eyes. The bald man laughed directly into my face. The walls of the bar seemed to stretch upward. The lights became brighter. The laughter continued. It filled my ears. It filled my skull. It became the only sound in the world. I laughed until I could not breathe. I laughed until my knees gave way. I laughed as the floor rose to meet me. The last thing I saw was the bald man looking down. His smile disappeared. The false Russian accent was gone when he spoke again. Subject is ready. Then everything became dark. The official record was dated Friday, July 24th, 2026. It identified the patient only as subject number 116. The report stated that the subject had been held for 2,158 days. For the first several years, his condition remained stable. He showed no reaction to light, sound, pain, medication, or changes in room temperature. His eyes remained closed. His brain activity stayed low but present. His heart continued beating with the help of a carefully controlled mixture of drugs and machines. The researchers believed he was asleep, not normal sleep, something deeper, something the brain had entered to protect itself. They tried to wake him many times. Caffeine had no effect. Amphetamines had no effect. Electric shocks caused small muscle movements but did not bring him back. Pain did nothing. Heat did nothing. Cold did nothing. After 848 days of complete silence, the subject moved. It began with a twitch in the fingers. Then the right arm tightened against the restraint. His heart rate increased even though stabilizing drugs were still being pumped into his body. The machines detected a sudden rise in brain activity. The attending nurse called for the doctor. By the time the medical team entered the room, the subject had become still again. They reviewed the surveillance footage. The movements appeared similar to parasomnia. Sleep-talking, unclear mumbling, involuntary motion. The same behavior seen in people who walked, spoke, or acted while asleep. The nurse claimed she heard the subject whisper something before his body relaxed. The doctors asked her to repeat the words. She hesitated. Then she swore on her mother's life that she had heard him say one word twice. Russia, he whispered. Russia. After that, subject number 116 smiled. His heart rate returned to normal. The brain activity dropped. The room became silent again. The final sentence in the report stated that the subject had returned to a stable condition. No one noticed that 3 minutes later, every member of the night staff began laughing. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. My phone keeps a map of everywhere I go. I never turned that feature on. At least, I do not remember turning it on. Until a few weeks ago, I did not even know it existed. It turns out it had been running quietly in the background for years, recording every road I drove down, every store I entered, and every place where I stopped for more than a few minutes. I found it by accident. I was looking for a receipt from a hardware store. I needed to return a lamp, but I could not remember which branch I had bought it from. There were 3 of the same stores near my apartment, all in different strip malls, and I had visited at least 2 of them that month. I opened the map app on my phone, hoping it might show my recent searches. Instead, I noticed a small option called Timeline. When I pressed it, a map appeared with little dots marking the places I had visited. Gray lines connected the dots, showing the roads I had taken between them. Beneath the map was a list of stops, complete with times, distances, and guesses about how I had traveled. It knew when I had driven. It knew when I had walked. It even knew when I had spent 10 minutes sitting in a coffee shop across the street from work. I found the hardware store quickly. It was the branch near the supermarket, just as I had suspected. I should have closed the app after that. Instead, I began scrolling. At first, it was interesting. I looked through the previous week and saw my normal routine laid out in front of me. Home, work, grocery store, gas station, home again. It felt strange seeing my life reduced to dots and lines, but it was also almost comforting. The app remembered things I had forgotten. It knew where I had stopped for lunch on Tuesday. It knew which road I took when traffic was bad. It knew I had spent 47 minutes at the dentist, even though I would have guessed it was closer to half an hour. Then I found the first Thursday. It was 3 weeks earlier. According to the app, I had left my apartment at 9:50 p.m. I had driven for 41 minutes, traveling north past the edge of town, then east along the road beside the reservoir. The trip ended at a house on a road I did not recognize. The app said I had arrived at 10:31. There was no return journey listed until later, shortly before midnight. I stared at the map for several seconds. I had no memory of making that trip. Thursday nights were not unusual for me. I usually came home from work, heated something for dinner, and spent the evening watching television or reading. I did not have many friends nearby, and I was not dating anyone. I rarely went out after 9 unless I needed groceries. I certainly did not drive 41 minutes into the countryside. I tapped the address. The app showed a satellite picture of a small house surrounded by trees. The image was old and slightly blurred, but the property looked real. There was a narrow driveway, a patch of grass, and what appeared to be a garden behind the house. I thought it had to be a mistake. Phones made mistakes all the time. They connected to the wrong tower or misunderstood weak signals. Sometimes my map showed me standing in the middle of the street when I was actually inside my apartment. Once, it thought I had driven through a lake because the road had been moved after the satellite image was taken. I told myself the location history had simply placed me at the wrong address. Then I scrolled to the Thursday before. The same trip was there. I had supposedly left at 9:50 p.m., driven for 41 minutes, and arrived at the same house at 10:31. I checked the week before that. Another Thursday. The same times. The same road. The same address. I stopped breathing normally. I went back another week. Then another. Every Thursday showed the same journey. The route never changed. The time never changed. The app always said I left at 9:50, traveled past the reservoir, and arrived at the house at exactly 10:31. It had been happening for 4 months. I scrolled as far back as I could. The first trip appeared during the week after my father's funeral. I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hand, staring at the screen. My father had died suddenly. He had suffered a heart attack while fixing something in his garage. By the time my mother found him, there was nothing anyone could do. The funeral had been quiet and uncomfortable. My father had not been an easy man to know, and grief had not made our family any closer. My mother barely spoke to me that day. My older sister left as soon as the service ended. I returned to my apartment the next afternoon and went back to work 2 days later. I remembered the week after the funeral clearly, or at least I thought I did. I had been tired. I had trouble sleeping. I drank too much coffee and avoided answering phone calls from relatives. But I did not remember driving to a stranger's house. I want to be honest about what I felt when I found those trips. My first feeling was not fear. It was the feeling of being caught. That is the only way I can explain it. It felt as if someone had handed me a photograph of myself doing something terrible, something I would swear I had never done. My first instinct was not to question whether the photograph was real. My first instinct was to wonder what other photographs existed. I felt guilty without knowing what I was guilty of. My skin became hot. My mouth went dry. I looked around my bedroom even though I was alone. The phone suddenly felt heavy in my hand. I checked other days, searching for more places I could not explain. Most of the timeline matched my memory. Work, shops, restaurants, and home. A few stops seemed slightly wrong, but nothing like the Thursday trips. Only Thursdays were missing from my mind. I opened my messages and searched the address. Nothing. I searched my email. Nothing. I checked my call history for the Thursday nights. There were no calls during the trips. I looked through my photos. There were no pictures of the house, the road, or the reservoir. My bank account showed no purchases during those hours. No fuel, no food, no cash withdrawals. There was no proof that I had gone there, except for the map. I considered calling the phone company, but I knew how ridiculous it would sound. I also thought about deleting the location history and pretending I had never seen it. Instead, I wrote the address down on a piece of paper. 2 days later, I drove there. I chose Saturday afternoon. I waited until the sun was high and the weather was clear, because I was not stupid. Whatever was happening, I did not want to visit that place at night. I told myself I was only going to check the address. I would drive past the house, look at it from the road, and then return home. That was the plan. The drive took exactly 41 minutes. I watched the clock the entire way. At first, the route followed roads I knew. Then, it passed the northern edge of town and continued toward the reservoir. The houses became farther apart. Shops disappeared. The road narrowed and began curving between thick groups of trees. I had driven near the reservoir before, but never this far around it. The water flashed through the trees on my left, dark blue, beneath the sunlight. On my right were old fences, empty fields, and small roads with hand-painted signs. The map guided me onto one of those roads. The pavement soon became rough. Trees leaned over both sides, forming a tunnel of branches above the car. There were only a few houses, each separated by long stretches of forest. Then the app told me I had arrived. The address was real. A small house stood at the end of a short gravel driveway. It was older than it had looked in the satellite picture, but it was well cared for. The walls were painted white, and the shutters were blue. Flower boxes hung beneath the front windows. A narrow path led from the driveway to the porch. A wind chime made from old spoons hung beside the door. The spoons tapped against one another in the breeze, making a soft, uneven sound. There was a woman sitting on the porch. She looked to be around 70. Her white hair was pulled back, and she wore a light green sweater despite the warm weather. A mug rested on the small table beside her chair. The moment I stopped the car, she stood up. Then she smiled. It was not the polite smile a stranger gives someone who has parked in the wrong driveway. It was warm and familiar. She looked like she had been expecting me. I almost drove away. Before I could put the car back into reverse, she stepped down from the porch and raised one hand. "You're early this week," she called. I did not move. She came closer, still smiling. When she reached the car, she stopped beside the driver's window. I lowered it only a few inches. "Can I help you?" I asked. Her smile weakened. She looked confused. Then she laughed softly. "That's usually my line," she said. "You normally come to help me. I'm sorry. I think you have me confused with someone else." The woman stared at me. Her expression slowly changed from amusement to concern. "No," she said. "I don't think I do." I wanted to leave, but I stayed. I asked her name. She said it was Eleanor. The name meant nothing to me. I told her mine. She nodded as though I had confirmed something she already knew. "I know," she said. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. "How do you know me?" She looked back toward the house. "You come every Thursday." I felt something cold move through my stomach. "What time?" "A little after 10:30. She said it without hesitation. The exact time from the phone. I turned off the engine. I did not know why. Part of me understood that staying was dangerous, but another part needed answers more than it needed safety. I got out of the car. Eleanor stepped back to give me room. Up close, I could see that she was not afraid of me. She looked worried, but not frightened. She looked at me the way someone might look at an old friend who had suddenly forgotten their name. "Would you like coffee?" she asked. I almost said no. Then she added, "2 sugars and just a little milk, right?" That was exactly how I took it. I had never met her. I had never been to that house. But she knew how I drank my coffee. I followed her onto the porch. The spoon wind chime moved above us, tapping quietly. Eleanor opened the door and invited me inside. The house smelled like coffee, old books, and something sweet baking in the kitchen. The furniture was simple, but comfortable. Family photographs covered the walls, though I did not recognize anyone in them. There was a couch in the living room and a large chair beside the front window. Eleanor pointed toward the chair. "You always sit there," she said. I stopped walking. "Not on the couch?" She smiled carefully. "You say the couch hurts your back." My back had been bothering me for years. I sat in the chair by the window. It fit my body in a familiar way. That frightened me more than anything else had. Eleanor went into the kitchen and returned with a mug of coffee. 2 sugars. A little milk. She sat across from me. For several moments, neither of us spoke. I looked around the room, hoping something would trigger a memory. The curtains, the carpet, the framed photographs, the old clock above the fireplace. Nothing felt familiar, and yet my body seemed comfortable there. My hand reached automatically toward a small table beside the chair before I realized I was doing it. There was a coaster in the exact place where my fingers had expected one to be. Eleanor noticed. She said nothing. I drank the coffee. It tasted right. She asked whether I wanted to see the garden. I stared at her. "The garden? You always ask about it." "I do? Every week." She laughed gently. "You ask what is growing, and I tell you. Then the next Thursday, you ask me all over again. I used to think you were not listening." Her laugh was kind. It was the way someone laughs about a habit in a person they care for, not a stranger. I stood and walked toward the back window. The garden was larger than I had expected. Rows of vegetables stretched behind the house. Flowers grew along the fence. Near the far end was a small wooden bench beneath an apple tree. Something moved in an upstairs window. I looked up quickly. The curtain fell back into place. "Who else is here?" I asked. Eleanor went quiet, her hands folded together in her lap. I turned to face her. "What do I do when I come here?" She looked down. "Mostly, you sit with me." "That's all?" "Mostly. Why?" She did not answer. I stepped closer. "Why do I come every Thursday?" Eleanor looked toward the ceiling. "You come after she has fallen asleep," she said. The room seemed to become smaller. "Who?" She tipped her head toward the back of the house. I did not ask again. My mouth had gone dry. Some old animal part of me did not want the answer spoken aloud. I felt that if she said the name, something impossible would become real. I placed the coffee on the table. "I need to leave." Eleanor stood. "You only just got here. I shouldn't be here." Her face tightened with worry. "You say that sometimes." I stopped. "What?" "Some weeks you come in and act normal. Other weeks you seem confused." "How confused?" "You ask where you are. You ask who I am." A chill spread across my arms. "And what do you tell me?" "The truth." "What truth?" She opened her mouth, but I backed away. "No," I said. "Don't." Footsteps moved above us. Slow footsteps. Someone was walking across the second floor. I looked up. The steps stopped directly over my head. Eleanor followed my gaze. "She's awake," she whispered. That was enough. I walked quickly toward the front door. Eleanor followed me onto the porch. "You shouldn't drive when you're like this," she said. I ignored her. I reached my car and opened the door. "Please," she called. "At least wait until you remember." I turned to look at her. "Remember what?" Her eyes filled with sadness. "Why you started coming." I got into the car and drove away. The journey home felt longer than 41 minutes, but the clock said it was exactly the same. When I returned to my apartment, I locked the door and checked every room. I do not know what I expected to find. No one was there. I opened the timeline again. The app showed the trip to Eleanor's house. This time it was correct. I had left in the afternoon and returned before sunset. But the Thursday trips were still there. I thought about going to the police. What would I say? My phone claimed I visited an old woman once a week, and the old woman agreed. There was no crime. Nothing had been stolen. No one had threatened me. I was not even sure I wanted anyone else involved. I spent the next few days trying to remember. I searched my apartment for anything connected to Eleanor. A note, photograph, receipt, or key. I found nothing. On Monday, I called my mother and asked whether she knew anyone named Eleanor. She said no. I asked about the road near the reservoir. She became quiet. Then she said, "My father used to fish near there many years ago," but she did not know anyone who lived nearby. I asked if he had ever taken me. She said she could not remember. Before hanging up, she asked whether I was sleeping well. I lied and said yes. By Thursday, I had made a decision. I would not go. Whatever happened on those nights, I would prove that the phone was wrong. I came home directly after work and parked my car in the building's locked garage. I took a photograph of the mileage. I placed my keys in a kitchen drawer. Then I moved a chair in front of my apartment door. I turned on every light. At 9:30, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in front of me. At 9:45, nothing had happened. At 9:49, I began recording a video. I pointed the camera at myself, then at the locked door, the keys in the drawer, and the clock on the wall. At 9:50, I was still sitting there. I swear I did not move. The minutes passed slowly. I watched the phone the way you watch a sleeping dog you are not completely sure you can trust. At 10:00, I checked the timeline. It showed me at home. At 10:15, I checked again. Still home. At 10:31, I felt relief for the first time all week. The app had been wrong. Whatever had created those old trips was only a glitch. I kept watching the clock. 10:32, 10:33. At 10:34, my phone buzzed. A small card slid up from the bottom of the screen. It was one of those friendly notifications, the kind written as though the phone believed it was helping. "You've arrived," it said. "Welcome back." I stared at the words. Then the map opened by itself. A blue dot appeared at Eleanor's house. Not at my apartment. The app believed I was standing on her porch. I looked around the kitchen. The lights were still on. The door was still blocked by the chair. My keys were still in the drawer. The video was still recording. I had not moved, but the timeline showed that I had left my apartment at 9:50. It showed 41 minutes of driving. It showed me arriving at 10:31. Then I noticed the gray line. The app had already drawn the return trip before I had taken it. The route curved away from Eleanor's house, past the reservoir, back through town, and ended at my apartment. It said I had left her house at 10:31. It said I would arrive home at 11:12. The line was solid, certain, as if the journey had already happened. I checked the video recording. The screen showed me sitting at the table. Then, at exactly 9:50, the image froze. The sound continued, but the picture did not move. For 41 minutes, the video showed the same still image of me staring at the phone. At 10:31, the picture moved again. I watched myself blink. I watched myself look toward the door. The recording had not stopped. It had simply failed to show what happened during those 41 minutes. The phone buzzed again. This time, the notification said the return journey was in progress. I stood so quickly that the chair fell over behind me. The blue dot on the map began moving. It traveled slowly down Eleanor's driveway. Then it turned onto the road. I was watching myself drive home. Except I was still in the apartment. I went to the window and looked down toward the street. My car remained in the garage below, exactly where I had left it. The blue dot continued moving, past the trees, along the reservoir, closer to town. I tried to call Eleanor, but I did not have her number. I searched for the address online, hoping to find a landline. Nothing appeared. Then the phone rang. The number was hidden. I did not answer. It rang again. On the third call, I pressed the button and held the phone to my ear. For several seconds, there was only breathing. Then Eleanor spoke. "You left your coat," she said. I looked down. I was wearing my coat. "No," I whispered. "You should not have come tonight." I didn't. The breathing on the line changed. For one terrible second, I thought I heard another voice near her. My voice. Quiet and distant. "What is happening?" I asked. Eleanor began to cry. "I told you to wait until you remembered. Who is upstairs?" She did not answer. "Who is she?" The other voice grew louder. It was definitely mine. It sounded as though someone in Eleanor's house was standing close to the phone, speaking from the next room. I could not understand the words. Eleanor whispered, "You need to lock your door. It's already locked." "No," she said. "Not for you." The call ended. I looked at the map. The blue dot had entered town. The app said 18 minutes remained. I dragged the chair back against the door. I checked every window. I took a kitchen knife from the drawer, though I knew it would not help against something I did not understand. The blue dot moved steadily closer. 15 minutes. 10:05, at 11:11, it turned onto my street. At 11:12, it stopped directly outside my building. The phone buzzed one final time. "You've arrived home." I stood in the middle of the apartment, holding the knife with both hands. Nothing happened. For several seconds, the building was silent. Then I heard the front entrance open downstairs. Footsteps entered the hallway. They moved slowly toward the stairs. one step at a time. I watched my apartment door. The footsteps reached my floor. They stopped outside. The doorknob did not move. There was no knock. Instead, I heard someone breathing on the other side. The phone lay on the kitchen table, its screen still glowing. The timeline did not believe I had stayed home that night. The timeline believed I had driven to Eleanor's house. It believed I had sat with her until 10:31. It believed I had returned to my apartment at 11:12. And the app was usually right about me, more right than I was. The person outside placed one hand against the door. I heard the soft scrape of skin against the wood. Then, my own voice spoke from the hallway. I forgot my keys. I did not answer. The voice laughed quietly. It sounded tired. Familiar. Let me in, it said. You know I live here. I stared at the gap beneath the door. A shadow blocked the light from the hallway. Then another shadow appeared beside it. Smaller, someone else was standing there too. A woman's voice whispered my name. I did not recognize the voice, but something deep inside me did. A memory stirred at the edge of my mind. An upstairs room. A girl sleeping beneath a white blanket. My father standing in Eleanor's garden. A Thursday night. Then it was gone. The person outside knocked 3 times. I looked at the map again. There were now 2 blue dots at my address. One inside the apartment, one in the hallway. The app had labeled both of them with my name, and I still do not know which one of us is supposed to open the door. What do you hear, boy? I whispered. Max stood beside me with his head lowered and his ears raised. His whole body had become still, like a statue made of muscle and fur. I held my rifle tighter against my chest and slowly looked around the forest. The trees were thick in this part of the woods. Tall pines rose above us, blocking most of the sky. Only thin lines of sunlight reached the ground. The air was hot and heavy, and the smell of wet leaves and old wood filled my nose. Nothing moved. Not a bird, not an insect, not even the wind. That silence was what frightened me most. The forest was never truly silent anymore. There was always something moving in the distance. A branch breaking, leaves shifting. A sound that might have been an animal, or might have been something pretending to be one. Max knew the difference better than I did. He had saved my life more times than I could count. He knew better than to bark or growl. A growl could give away our position. A bark could bring more of them. Instead, he pointed. His nose faced the base of a tree about 20 feet in front of us. His front legs stiffened, and the fur along his back rose slowly. His eyes locked onto the trunk. I followed his gaze. The tree looked normal. It was wide and dark, covered in rough bark and green moss. Thick bushes grew around its roots. There was enough space behind it for someone to hide. Or something. I lifted the rifle and aimed. My finger rested near the trigger, but I did not touch it yet. Max raised one paw from the ground. His lips pulled back just enough to show the tips of his teeth. He wanted to attack. I had trained him to wait. Patience was the only reason we were still alive. Easy, I whispered. Wait. A drop of sweat rolled from my forehead and entered my eye. It stung, but I did not blink. I could not risk looking away. We waited. For 1 second. Then 2. Then 5. The bushes moved. I tightened my grip. A pale face slowly appeared from behind the tree. My breath stopped. For a moment, I forgot how to stand. My arms felt weak, and the rifle lowered slightly. I knew that face. I had looked at it every morning for almost 20 years. I had kissed those lips before leaving for work. I had watched those eyes fill with tears on our wedding day. I had seen that same smile across dinner tables, hospital rooms, family holidays, and quiet evenings at home. It was my wife. Honey, she called. Her voice moved through the trees as softly as the wind. She stepped out from behind the trunk. "You and Max hunting again?" she asked with a small laugh. "You boys never change." My shoulders relaxed before I could stop them. My heart felt like it had cracked open inside my chest. She looked exactly the same as I remembered. Her brown hair rested on her shoulders. She wore the light blue shirt she often wore while gardening. There was a small mark near her left eyebrow, the same one she had gotten when she fell from her bike as a child. Even her smile was perfect. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to drop the rifle and pull her into my arms. It had been months since I had last seen her. Months since the night she disappeared. Months since I had heard her scream from somewhere beyond the trees while I stood helplessly inside our shelter. I had searched for her for days after that. I had followed footprints, broken branches, and pieces of cloth. I had called her name until my throat bled. Max and I had walked deeper into the forest than we had ever dared to go. We had found no body, no blood, no clear sign of where they had taken her. Only her wedding ring resting on a flat stone beside a stream. I had kept that ring in my pocket ever since. Some part of me had refused to believe she was dead. Some part of me had waited for this exact moment. Now she was walking toward me. She moved between the trees slowly, almost gracefully. Her feet made no sound against the leaves. Branches did not seem to touch her. She appeared to drift through the forest instead of walking across it, like a ghost. The thought struck me so suddenly that I raised the rifle again. My wife stopped smiling for a moment, but then the smile returned. "Honey," she said. I wanted her to be real. I wanted it so badly that it hurt. Nearly every part of my soul begged me to believe her. Nearly every part. Max did not move. He stood in the same defensive position, his body stiff and his teeth showing. His eyes never left her. Max had loved my wife. He used to follow her around the house. He slept beside her chair when she read. When she worked in the garden, he lay in the grass and watched her. If this were truly her, he would have run to her. He would have cried with happiness. He would have covered her hands and face with wet kisses. Instead, he looked ready to tear her apart. My wife came closer. 10 feet, 8 feet, 6 feet. Close enough for me to see every line on her face. Close enough to smell the soap she used to wash her hair. My throat tightened. "Don't come any closer," I said. My voice was weak. It barely sounded like my own. She stopped. Her smile vanished and became a worried frown. "What? Stay where you are. Honey, it's me." She looked down at the rifle, then back into my eyes. "Don't be silly," she said. "Put the gun down." Tears burned my eyes. "You're not her." Her mouth opened slightly. "What are you talking about?" "I know you're not her." She looked hurt. The expression was so real that I almost lowered the gun again. "You can't be her," I continued. "You can't." She took a small breath. Her eyes filled with tears. I had seen her cry hundreds of times, but never like this. She looked completely broken, like my words had destroyed something inside her. For almost 20 years, she had been my home. She was the person I spoke to when I was afraid, the person I trusted more than anyone in the world. She knew every mistake I had made, every secret I carried, and every weakness I tried to hide. She was my life. But I knew the truth. Those things did not return people. They took them. The first time we heard about them, we thought the stories were lies. People came into our town talking about missing family members who returned after days or weeks. At first, everyone celebrated. They thought the missing people had somehow escaped. Then, The killings began. A man returned to his wife after disappearing during a hunting trip. 2 nights later, the neighbors heard screaming. When they entered the house, they found the wife and children dead. The man's body had changed. His skin had split open down the back. Something green and thin had crawled out before escaping through a window. Other people came back too. They looked normal. They spoke normally. They remembered private details that only the real person should have known. But animals always understood. Dogs barked at them. Horses refused to go near them. Cats hid under furniture and screamed. The creatures copied people perfectly, but they could never copy whatever made animals trust us. That was how we learned. That was why I trusted Max more than my own eyes. "You're scaring me, darling," she said. Her voice was gentle now. "You know I hate it when you act like this. Put the gun down. Come home." Home, the word nearly broke me. For one moment, I saw our old house again. I saw the kitchen with its yellow walls. I saw my wife standing near the stove, singing badly while making breakfast. I saw our daughter sitting at the table, laughing because Max was begging for food. I remembered summer evenings in the backyard, my wife's hands covered in garden soil, our daughter running through the grass in her pink pajamas. I remembered safety. I remembered a world before the forest filled with things wearing human faces. "I can't," I whispered. My hands began shaking. I pressed the rifle harder against my shoulder and aimed at her chest. "Please," I said, "go back." My wife looked confused. "Back where?" "Wherever you came from." She stared at me. For a moment, something changed in her face. It was small, so small that I might have imagined it. Her eyes seemed colder. Her breathing stopped. The sadness disappeared, replaced by something empty and careful. She was studying me, trying to understand how much I knew, trying to decide whether I was bluffing. "Don't make me do this," I said. Her face softened again. "You would shoot me?" "I don't want to. I'm your wife." "No, we have a daughter." My finger tightened near the trigger. The mention of our daughter filled me with anger. "Don't talk about her. Our little girl needs you. Stop, she asks about you every night." My heart pounded. That was impossible. My daughter was safe inside the shelter. At least she had been when I left that morning. I had told her to stay with the others. I had told her not to open the door for anyone, even if she heard my voice outside. She had cried when I left. She hated being separated from Max and me, but we needed food. The shelter's supplies were running low, and hunting had become more dangerous each week. The creatures were learning. They had started copying the voices of children. They had started setting traps. My wife tilted her head. "She misses her mother," she said. The way she said it made my skin crawl. "Stop talking. She cries for me. You don't know that. I know everything she says. That's not possible." I remember the day she was born. My breathing became uneven. "I remember the song you sang to her when she was a baby," she continued. She began singing quietly. It was the song, a simple little tune I had made up when our daughter was too young to sleep through the night. No one else knew it. My wife and I had never sung it around other people. The rifle shook harder. "How do you know that?" I asked. She smiled again. "Because it's me." Max made a low sound in his throat. I looked down at him for less than a second. His eyes remained fixed on her. He knew. That was all that mattered. My wife took one step forward. "Stop," I said. She did not. "Please," she moved closer. Her bare feet touched the leaves, but they still made no sound. "I just want to go home," she said. "You're not coming with me. Why are you doing this?" "Because you're not her." Another step. I could see a thin line of dirt beneath her fingernails. I remembered finding my wife's ring beside the stream. I remembered the drag marks in the mud. I remembered Max following the smell until he reached a dark hole between the rocks. Something had moved inside that hole. Something with too many legs. We had heard my wife screaming from deep underground. I had almost gone in after her. Max had grabbed my sleeve in his teeth and pulled me back. Minutes later, the screaming stopped. They did not leave survivors. I knew that. Everyone knew that. "Stop," I whimpered. My wife's smile faded. She took another step. "Stop now," I shouted. My voice echoed through the trees. Her face became blank. Not sad, not angry, not afraid. Blank, that emptiness was worse than any monster's face. I placed my finger on the trigger. She moved again. One final step. I began to pull. Tears ran down my cheeks. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Before I could fire, Max growled. It was not the quiet warning sound he had made before. It was sharp, deep, and full of rage. Then he attacked. He crossed the space between them in seconds. My wife turned toward him, but she was too slow. Max jumped and struck her chest. They fell together. His teeth closed around her neck. The sound that came from her mouth was not human. It began as my wife's scream, but quickly became something else. The voice stretched into a high, painful cry that seemed to come from several mouths at once. I stepped backward and raised the rifle. The thing hit Max with both hands. Its fingers became longer as I watched. The nails turned black and sharp. Max did not let go. He shook his head violently. The skin around the creature's face began to move. My wife's features twisted and broke apart. One eye sank into the skull while the other became dark and wide. Her mouth opened far beyond what a human jaw should allow. Green liquid poured from the wound in its neck. The creature screamed once more. Then Max tore away a large piece of flesh. The body fell still. Silence returned to the forest. Max stood over it, breathing heavily. Green blood covered his face and chest. A piece of pale flesh hung from his mouth. He dropped it onto the leaves. For a few seconds, the body still looked like my wife. Then the skin began to melt. Her face became soft and loose. The nose flattened. The eyes disappeared beneath a thin layer of gray flesh. Long legs pushed through the clothing. The fingers curled inward. Within minutes, there was almost nothing human left. I stared at the body. Relief and heartbreak filled me at the same time. I knew I had been right. That should have made me feel better. It did not. Seeing her face on that creature had opened every wound I had tried to close. For a few minutes, I had believed she might truly be alive. Now I had lost her again. Max looked up at me. His tail began to wag. He walked over and pressed his head against my leg. I lowered the rifle. My knees felt weak. I placed one hand on his back and slowly moved it down his spine. "Good boy," I whispered. My voice broke. "That's a good boy, Maxie." He licked my hand. Green blood covered my fingers. I wiped it on my trousers and looked toward the sky. The sun had already begun to move lower. We needed to leave. The forest became much more dangerous after dark. At night, the creatures stopped trying to look human. They hunted in groups. They moved through the trees without making a sound. Sometimes they surrounded the shelter and called out in voices they had stolen. They used the voices of friends, parents, children, people we had buried. I did not want to be outside when that began. "We're going home," I told Max. The word felt strange after what the creature had said. Still, the shelter was the closest thing we had left. I checked my ammunition and then picked up the small bag of food I had collected earlier. It was not much. 2 rabbits, a few plants, and several mushrooms I believed were safe. It would have to be enough. I gave the dead creature one final look. Its body had become a thin, twisted shape covered in green blood. Black veins moved beneath its gray skin even though it was dead. I wanted to burn it, but there was no time. Fire also attracted them. Max sniffed the air. "Come on," I said. We turned away from the body and began walking toward the shelter. We had only taken 3 steps when Max stopped. His tail stopped moving. His ears rose. His body stiffened. My heart sank. "No," I whispered. Max looked toward another tree. It stood about 30 feet away, partly hidden behind thick bushes. I slowly lifted my rifle. My arms were tired, but I forced them to remain steady. The bushes moved. A small hand appeared around the trunk. My breath caught in my throat. Someone stepped out. She was small, too small. She wore pink Hello Kitty pajamas, the ones my daughter had worn the night before. The cloth was torn at one knee and covered in dirt. One sleeve hung loosely from her shoulder. Her dark hair was tangled. Tears covered her cheeks. "Daddy?" she whispered. My body went cold. The forest seemed to move around me. I could no longer feel the heat of the sun. I could no longer hear my own breathing. My daughter stood behind the tree. She looked exactly as she had when I left the shelter that morning. The same pajamas, the same messy hair, the same small mark on her chin from when she fell while playing near the shelter. She looked at the dead creature on the ground. Then she looked at Max. Her lower lip began to shake. "Daddy," she said again. Max did not run to her. He did not wag his tail. His fur rose along his back. A quiet growl formed inside his chest. The little girl flinched. Her eyes filled with more tears. "Why did Maxie hurt Mommy?" she whimpered. I stared at her. My hands began shaking again. Behind us, the dead creature's fingers moved against the leaves. In front of us, the thing wearing my daughter's face took one slow step closer. And somewhere far away, in the direction of the shelter, I heard a child begin to scream. Everything is happening so fast that I can barely think straight. My hands are shaking as I write this, and I keep stopping every few seconds because I can hear my wife laughing from the other room. The police are on their way, but every minute feels longer than the last. I do not know what they are going to find when they arrive. I do not know what I am going to tell them. I am not even sure they will believe me. I do not know exactly when my wife began to change. There was no single moment when she suddenly became a different person. It happened slowly, quietly, in ways that were easy to explain at first. If I had to guess when it started, I would say it began after our daughter was born. The birth had been difficult. My wife was in labor for many hours, and by the time our daughter finally arrived, she looked completely drained. She smiled when the nurse placed the baby in her arms, but there was something strange in her eyes. I assumed it was shock, pain, and exhaustion. Anyone would have looked tired after what she had been through. The first few days at home were hard for both of us. Our daughter cried constantly. She slept for short periods, sometimes only 20 or 30 minutes at a time. As soon as we managed to close our eyes, she would begin crying again. My wife tried to do everything herself. She fed the baby, changed her clothes, washed the bottles, cleaned the house, and worried about every small sound our daughter made. I told her to rest. I offered to take over during the night. Sometimes she accepted my help, but most of the time she refused. She kept saying that she was the mother and that it was her responsibility. I could see the lack of sleep affecting her. Her face became pale. Dark circles formed under her eyes. She forgot simple things like where she had placed her phone or whether she had already fed the baby. Sometimes she would stand in the middle of a room and stare at the wall as if she had forgotten why she had entered. I thought it was normal. Everyone had warned us that having a newborn would be exhausting. Friends told us that the first few months were always the worst. They said we would eventually find a routine and things would become easier. Instead, things became stranger. A few weeks after we brought our daughter home, my wife began talking in her sleep. At first, it was only quiet mumbling. I would wake during the night and hear her whispering beside me. Most of the words were too soft to understand. I would lean closer, trying to figure out what she was saying, but the words never made sense. Sometimes she repeated my name. Other times she said our daughter's name. There were nights when she sounded frightened. Her breathing would become fast and uneven. She would twist under the blankets, kick her legs, and grip the sheets in her fists. Once, she suddenly sat upright and screamed my name so loudly that I nearly fell out of bed. I grabbed her shoulders and asked what was wrong. She opened her eyes and stared directly at me, but for several seconds she did not seem to recognize me. Then she blinked and looked around the room. She said she had been dreaming, but she could not remember the dream. Another night, she screamed our daughter's name. We both jumped out of bed and rushed to the crib, expecting to find something wrong. Our daughter was sleeping peacefully. My wife stood over the crib with tears in her eyes. She watched the baby for almost an hour before she agreed to return to bed. The nightmares became more common after that. She tossed and turned almost every night. She made low sounds in her throat, sometimes groaning and sometimes crying. On a few occasions, she seemed to be arguing with someone in her sleep. I could only understand pieces of what she said. No, not yet. She's too small. Leave her alone. Whenever I asked her about it the next morning, she remembered nothing. Then the sleepwalking began. The first time it happened, I woke and found her standing beside the bedroom door. Her eyes were closed, and her arms hung loosely at her sides. She was swaying slightly. I spoke her name, but she did not answer. I remembered hearing that you should never suddenly wake a sleepwalker. I had no idea whether that was true, but I did not want to frighten her. I walked over slowly, placed my hands on her shoulders, and guided her back to bed. She lay down without opening her eyes and immediately began snoring. The next morning, she laughed when I told her what had happened. She said that she had never sleepwalked before. She blamed it on stress and lack of sleep. I wanted to believe that was all it was. Over the next few weeks, I caught her wandering around the house several times. Once, I found her standing in the kitchen with the refrigerator door open. Another time, she was in the living room, staring toward the back window. Each time, I gently guided her back to bed. Then, I started noticing the dirt. She would wake in the morning with soil covering her fingers. Mud was packed under her fingernails. Sometimes there were small cuts across her palms, as if she had been scratching at something rough. When I asked about it, she looked confused. She liked gardening, so at first I assumed she had been working outside and had forgotten to wash her hands properly. We had a small garden in the backyard where she grew flowers, herbs, and a few vegetables. Before the baby was born, she spent hours caring for it. But she had not been gardening recently. She was too tired, and most of the plants had begun to die. Still, I did not connect the dirt to the sleepwalking. Not at first. Then things began to disappear. The first missing item was one of our daughter's bottles. We searched the kitchen cabinets, the sink, the dishwasher, and the bedroom. We could not find it. We assumed we had accidentally thrown it away. A few days later, 2 pacifiers disappeared. Then one of the baby's blankets went missing. After that, it was a framed family photograph that had been sitting on a shelf in the living room. The picture had been taken at the hospital the day our daughter was born. It showed my wife holding the baby while I stood beside her. The frame was simply gone. The missing objects were never important enough to cause panic. They disappeared, one at a time, with days between each event. It was easy to believe that we had misplaced them. Our house was messy. We were both tired. Baby clothes, diapers, blankets, and toys were everywhere. But as more things vanished, I began paying attention. Bibs disappeared from drawers. Clean diapers vanished from the changing table. Small toys went missing from the floor. Another bottle disappeared from the drying rack. Our daughter would cry whenever she could not find a toy she liked. My wife and I would search the entire house, checking under furniture, inside cabinets, behind doors, and beneath the crib. We never found anything. My wife always swore that she had no idea where the objects had gone. I believed her at first. I wanted to believe her. She was tired, but she was still my wife. She loved our daughter more than anything. Still, there were moments when I caught her staring at the empty places where the missing items had been. There was something in her face during those moments. It was not confusion. It looked more like recognition. Whenever she noticed me watching, her expression changed. One night, I woke because I felt the mattress move. I opened my eyes and saw my wife slowly climbing out of bed. At first, I assumed the baby was crying. Our daughter's crib was in the corner of our bedroom, and she had started making small, unhappy sounds. I thought my wife was getting up to feed her or rock her back to sleep. Then I heard my wife snoring. She was standing beside the bed, but she was still asleep. Her eyes were closed. Her mouth hung slightly open. She moved with slow, careful steps. I sat up, but I did not speak. My wife walked toward the crib. Our daughter's cries became louder. She kicked beneath her blanket and waved her small arms in the air. My wife stopped beside the crib and stood over her. For a moment, I was sure she was going to reach down and pick her up. Instead, she raised both hands and grabbed the mobile hanging above the crib. The mobile had small cloth animals that slowly turned when the music played. Our daughter loved watching them. My wife carefully removed it from the crib. She did not look at the baby. She did not react to the crying. She turned away and walked toward the bedroom door. I climbed out of bed and followed her. I should have stopped her. I know that now. But at the time, I was too confused and curious. I wanted to understand where she was going and what she was doing. I left our daughter crying in the crib and followed my wife into the hallway. She moved down the stairs without touching the railing. Her eyes remained closed, yet she never stumbled. She walked through the dark house as if she could see everything clearly. I stayed several steps behind her. She crossed the living room, passed through the dining room, and entered the kitchen. When she reached the back door, she unlocked it without hesitation. Cold night air entered the house. My wife stepped outside. The backyard was dark except for the weak light coming from the kitchen window. The grass was wet, and the ground was soft from rain earlier that week. She walked to the far side of the yard, close to the old wooden fence. Then, she dropped to her knees. I stood near the door and watched. She placed the mobile beside her and pressed both hands into the soil. She began digging. She did not use a shovel or any gardening tools. She clawed at the earth with her bare fingers. She pulled out handfuls of wet dirt and threw them behind her. Her fingernails scraped against stones and roots. I could hear the sound from where I stood. She never stopped snoring. That was when I noticed the other patches. There were dark areas scattered across the backyard where the soil looked recently disturbed. Some were close to the fence. Others were near the garden. There were more than a dozen of them. I had seen those patches before, but I had never paid attention. I had assumed they were places where the grass had died or where animals had been digging. Now I understood. My wife continued digging until the hole was about a foot wide and a foot deep. Then she picked up the mobile and placed it inside. She pushed the dirt back over it and pressed the ground flat with both hands. When she finished, she stood up. Her nightclothes were covered in mud. Her hands were black with soil. Her fingernails were broken and bleeding. She walked directly past me without opening her eyes. I moved out of her way. She entered the house, climbed the stairs, returned to our bedroom, and collapsed onto the bed. Our daughter was still crying. My wife pulled the blanket over herself and continued sleeping. I stood there for several seconds, trying to understand what I had witnessed. Then, I picked up my daughter. I held her tightly against my chest and rocked her. She cried for several minutes before finally calming down. That night, I did not return to bed. I sat in a chair beside the crib until morning, watching my wife sleep. When the sun came up, I had one clear goal. I was going to find everything that had disappeared. After breakfast, I took a small garden shovel and went into the backyard. I started with the hole my wife had dug during the night. I uncovered the mobile within minutes. It was already covered in mud. Then I moved to the other disturbed patches. In the first hole, I found a bottle. In the next, I found 2 pacifiers and a bib. Another hole contained several diapers that had become heavy with rainwater and dirt. I kept digging. I found toys, baby clothes, blankets, and the missing family photograph. The glass in the frame had cracked, and the image was stained with mud. Some holes contained only one item. Others held several. Everything that had disappeared was buried in our backyard. When my wife came outside and saw what I was doing, she looked horrified. I showed her the dirty bottle. I showed her the damaged picture. I showed her the baby clothes pulled from the earth. She shook her head and said it was impossible. I told her what I had seen during the night. She said I was lying. Then she saw her hands. There was still soil beneath her fingernails. Small cuts crossed her palms. She began to cry. She cried harder when I showed her all the holes. She kept saying that she would never hurt our daughter. She said she did not remember leaving the bed or walking outside. I believed that she did not remember. Her fear looked real. For the next several days, I slept lightly. I locked the back door and hid the key. I placed a chair against the bedroom door, hoping the noise would wake me if she tried to leave. The sleepwalking stopped. At least, that was what I thought. The sleep-talking continued. She still whispered strange words. She still called our daughter's name. Sometimes she laughed softly in her sleep, but whenever I woke her, she looked frightened and confused. We discussed seeing a doctor. My wife promised she would make an appointment, but days passed, and she never did. I should have insisted. I should have taken our daughter somewhere safe. I should have understood that the missing objects were not random. For a while, nothing else disappeared. I started to relax. My wife seemed to improve. She slept more during the day. She smiled again. She spent time playing with our daughter. The color slowly returned to her face. I convinced myself that the worst was over. Then, I woke up this morning. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Wet earth. It filled the bedroom. I opened my eyes and felt something rough beneath my cheek. Dirt covered the bed. There was mud on the blankets, the pillows, and the floor. My hands were dirty. Soil was packed under my fingernails. My wife lay beside me. Her hair was tangled with grass and mud. Her face was streaked with dirt. Her hands were covered in scratches. For several seconds, I could not move. The room was silent, too silent. Then I looked toward the corner. The crib was empty. Our daughter was gone. I jumped out of bed and screamed her name. My wife woke suddenly. She stared at the empty crib and began screaming too. We searched the room. We checked beneath the bed, inside the closet, and behind the curtains, even though we knew she could not be there. We ran through the house, calling her name. The front door was still locked. The back door stood open. Mud covered the kitchen floor. There were footprints leading outside. Some belonged to my wife. Some belonged to me. We ran into the backyard. The morning air was cold and the grass was wet beneath my bare feet. At first, I did not see anything. Then my wife pointed toward the far corner of the yard. There was a new patch of disturbed earth near the fence. This hole was different from the others. It was much bigger. The soil had been piled high around it. The shape was long and narrow. It looked like a grave. I ran toward it, but my legs gave way before I reached the edge. My wife stood behind me. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, she started laughing. It was a small laugh at first, almost like a nervous reaction. I turned toward her, expecting to see tears. Instead, she was smiling. Mud covered her face. Blood stained her broken fingernails. She stared at the grave and laughed louder. I grabbed her shoulders and asked what she had done. She kept laughing. I asked where our daughter was. She laughed harder. I called the police. I could barely explain what had happened. The woman on the phone told me not to touch the ground and to stay away from my wife until officers arrived. So now, we are waiting. I am sitting inside the house, writing this because I do not know what else to do. My wife is in the kitchen. She is covered in dirt. She is staring through the back window at the large grave in our yard. And she still will not stop laughing. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.